Hello, this is Greg Deckler, and welcome to Microsoft Hates Greg, or MSHGQM. So thus far, I'm going to be talking about measure totals once again in this video. And thus far, in discussing this topic, I have mainly focused on practical examples, right? I've shown practically how it's impossible to get a correct measure total in self-service visualization scenarios. I've shown practically, like stack visuals return, the correct total, and waterfall charts return the correct total, whereas table and matrix visuals do not, right? I'm showing very practical type things, and I can't help that. My degree is in mechanical engineering, so very practical in nature. Theory is great and all, but if you can't put that theory into practice, then who cares, right? And this is kind of where mathematicians and engineers kind of butt heads a little bit, and maybe best explained in that the classic mathematician engineering joke, where you have a mathematician and engineer. They're at a dance. There's a girl across the room. They both decide at the same time that they're going to have the distance between themselves and the girl, and who gets to dance with the girl? Right? What's the engineer? Because the mathematician never actually reaches the girl. Right at some point, the engineer's like, screw it, close enough. All right. So today, though, I thought I'd switch gears and I would talk about the measure total problem from a theoretical perspective, mainly around software design principles. And as you can see on your screen, the main software design principle is separation of concerns. Okay. And separation of concerns in the software engineering is probably the most important software design principle out there. Okay, and all it means is that you should decompose software into components, and then each of those components should have as little interaction with each other as possible. Okay, that's separation of concerns. Now, from a practical perspective, right, web pages are a great example of separation of concerns. So as you can see on this, I'm going to use this ideas.powerbi.com. If you want to vote for, the idea I've been promoting, you can go here, you can click on hot ideas, and should be the number one at the top. Otherwise, you can just search for matrix grand totals with measures, and you'll get there. All right, so web page, back in the old bad days of web pages, right? There was no separation of concern, right? Your data and structure of that data, as well as the presentation of that data, was all wrapped up in HTML. So we had special tags in HTML, like the B tag for bolding text, or you had properties of a tag, like font color. We could set it to font color equal red. So you can close like a div, and then you have, okay, I have font color equals red, and the text in that div would show up as red. Things like that. And this was a tremendously bad design, ultimately. Um, and so software engineers decided, well, we're going to fix this. And the way they fixed it is called cascading style sheets, or CSS. And what that allowed you to do is that the HTML then became just responsible for the data and the structure of the data, right? And you could include little tags, like, my tag would be style equals red text, okay? And then the CSS was up here, and it was the design and presentation layer. It is the design and presentation layer. And it would say, okay, if I have a tag that's, red text, then font color equals red. And now if I had to change, all of the 16 different places that I have, red text on my web page, I can do it in one place in CSS. And so basically you have your data and structure down here, and then you have kind of a lens that you're viewing that over. And so if you want to change the complete layout and design of your web page, you can do that by just editing the CSS up here, and you don't never have to touch the data and the structure down here. Okay, great separation of concerns. Okay, and anyone that is involved in web design would tell you that, like, if I said, okay, I want my HTML to know that if I float this element right here, that I want it, if it's floated to the right, then I want to present this information. But if it's floated to the left, I want to present different information. And anyone will tell you that that is a tremendously horrible idea. Okay. But this is what drives me nuts about measure totals in matrix and table visuals. It's exactly what we have to do in table and matrix visuals to get the correct total. And so let me show you. So bring up this one and go to here. And here I have this measure here, right? So we have this measure, different aggregate, where I'm trying to return in the total row the average of the sum of the sales. Okay. So as you can see in this table, this is just summing my sales. You can see they're the same. And then down here, I want to have the average. In order to get that, right, we have to do this has one value, right? Has one value, then I return the sum of the sales. Otherwise, I average X across the summarization of it. But this is basically in practice, what we're doing here is we're trying to have the data layer talk to the presentation layer to figure out, am I in a table row or am I in a table total? And of course, everyone's going to tell me, well, you're really talking to the filter context and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, but in practice, that's what's going on. And it seems to be getting even worse. Now that Microsoft's going down this visual calculations route, I have some grave concerns over how they seem to be implementing visual calculations. And I'll get into that in a bit. But of course, you're saying to me, well, in order for DAX to work, then there has to be a violation of separation of concerns, right? I have to have my presentation layer force down onto my data layer the filter context, and so that my DAX can calculate within the correct filter context. Okay, that's absolutely a valid point. And there are reasons to violate design principles, right? And trust me, I am one of those people that have never met a rule I didn't want to break. Um, but the other principle that comes into it, back to separation of concerns, is if you're going to violate separation of concerns, then do it in the most minimalistic way possible. Okay. So, yes, DAX has to know the filter context, right? That's being presented, that's being shoved down onto it from the visualization layer. But don't then turn around and say, well, in order to get a total to work, then I have to know my data layer has to know if I'm in a row or a total. That's my presentation layer's job. And it just boggles my mind in terms of, why Microsoft decided to go down this route, where they have stacked visuals and waterfall visuals and that, and they do the proper separation of concerns. It's the visualizations layer's job, right, to decide what is going to appear in that total, right? It's not abdicating that responsibility. Whereas with table and matrix visuals, it completely abdicates that responsibility and says, oh no, that's the data layer's job. Not a good design choice, right? It's the visualization layer's job. And that's why, because Microsoft violated that separation of concerns, right? Because they did that and they abdicated the responsibility from the visualization layer, that's why we get thrown into situations where we have self-service visualization, where we can't possibly come up with a DAX measure that returns the total that we want. Okay, if they hadn't abdicated the responsibility, then we could do that, right? We could do that by using something like this, where we have a format card, right, where we can control what our measure is going to do, whether it's going to be additive or non-additive, and what kind of aggregation it's going to return. And in the last, a couple of videos ago, when I showed the impossibility of various different measures, or the trim sum measure, right? I've got some other examples that I've created here, like this one is a good example of where you're not going to be able to do this in a self-service visualization kind of way. I've got some other examples, right? I've got this greater than or less than. So if you're using greater than or less than and trying to turn a one, if it's less than $1 million, you're not going to get the right total. And you can't get the right total in self-service visualizations if you wanted to count up all your ones, or if you're using an if statement. If red is in the colors, then return a one, otherwise the result. And guess what? You're not going to be able to get a correct total in that situation either, because the users can pull in whatever columns they want from this thing, and voila. I also showed in that video that you can't possibly physically create a measure because you're going to exceed the character limitations. So once you get to about 20 or 20 columns, you're going to exceed the DAX editor's ability to handle that many characters put into a measure formula. And then at 23 columns or so, you're going to exceed the billion character limitation of a string. But let's say that you have an unlimited amount of characters that you can put into a measure. Well, you still can't solve the problem. So for example, here I've got this triple trim sales where I'm trying to solve the problem of no matter what if the users put product category and product subcategory, or product category, subcategory, and color, that I can return a correct total. You can't get there. Okay. So you might try to construct it sort of like this. right? Where you're saying, okay, my sum, I'm going to try to determine what's in scope, category, subcategory, color, or is it category, subcategory? Is it just category? Or is it just color? Or is it just subcategory? And then you're going to do something like, hey, if has one value product category, product subcategory, has one color, product color, then return my measure, otherwise return my sum. Well, the issue is you don't get a total here. And that's because the filter context for this cell has no idea what's going on at the presentation layer. It has no idea if product category is in the visual or not in the visual. It has no idea if product subcategory is in the visual or not in the visual. It has no idea if color is in the visual or not. All it has is the filter context to go by. And so therefore, even if you had unlimited, you could create a measure as formula as long as possible, you still can't solve the problem because the data layer doesn't know what's going on at the visualization layer, and it shouldn't. Okay. So again, bad idea, bad design. Okay. And it seems to be getting worse. And this is where I have like grave concerns over visual calculations around how I'm seeing Microsoft try to implement that, and specifically around the offset function. Now, I haven't made a video on the offset function. I've been doing some experimenting on it. It's really bad. If Microsoft is trying to implement visual calculations using DAX, then that is a tremendously bad idea, and they're going to run into all kinds of problems and cause more issues than what they're going to solve. Okay, because again, data layer shouldn't know about the presentation layer. Should be a separation of concerns there. I don't want my data layer talking to my presentation layer to figure out that the offset is this or the offset is that in terms of in what my visual calculation should be. It should be implemented as a completely separate thing. But because of that offset function, I have grave concerns that Microsoft's trying to make the data layer talk to the presentation layer and closely couple those two layers, and that's going to turn out to be a tremendously bad idea, in my opinion. So that is all I have for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I will see everyone next time.